You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, biohacking, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere and anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your host, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, as he answers your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. Feel free and head over to beyondwellnessradio.com where you can access our full podcast transcriptions. While you're there, you can also sign up for our thyroid and female hormone video series. This series goes into the root cause of why your hormones are out of balance. While you're there, you can also schedule a functional medicine consult with Dr. Justin, myself, where we'll dig deeper into the root cause of your health challenges. Feel free and think of sharing this podcast with at least one person. This podcast grows by people sharing it. Sharing is caring. If you can think of one person that can benefit from this information, please feel free and share it. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also click below the video or podcast where you'll see the iTunes review button and leave us a review. You can also sign up for the newsletter at beyondwellnessradio.com where you'll get updates before anyone else. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. We got Dr. Tim Jackson back on the show. We're really excited to dig into some MTHFR, some genetic testing. Maybe we'll even talk about mycotoxins. Who knows if we'll have enough time to get it all. Dr. Tim, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great, Dr. Justin. How are you doing, sir?
Wonderful, wonderful, man. Glad that we're in touch and you're back on the show.
Yeah, it's fun. It should be a good time today.
Well, let's dig in, man. What's new on your radar in functional medicine land?
You know, I've just been delving deeper and deeper into mitochondria, and, I'm always asking myself, whether it's through research or dealing with clients and patients, what can I do to make everything else work better? And, almost always I find myself saying, well, make the mitochondria work better. And so looking at different therapies to, protect the mitochondria, to rehabilitate the cell membrane, to make sure it has, optimal fatty acid composition, to make sure environmental toxicant load is reduced as much as possible so that the Krebs and TCA cycle can go on, and then making sure the two rate-limiting factors, oxygen and ubiquinol or CoQ10, are present in adequate amounts. One just quick aside is that even low-level sleep apnea will affect your mitochondria negatively.
Interesting. All right, so we need oxygen. Sleep apnea is basically that delay where you just stop breathing while sleeping. And with sleep apnea, typically inflammation is going to be driving that. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's a self-perpetuating type cycle where inflammation is driving it, and once that inflammation gets going, it has a self-perpetuating mechanism, especially, and I know this is a $64,000 word, a cytokine or an inflammatory molecule like interleukin-6.
So true, because I notice every now and then I'll have like a little sleep apnea episode, like where I'll wake up just kind of like gasping for air. And it's typically on nights where if I have like a glass of wine or maybe have something that I shouldn't have, I notice that food allergen response really has an effect on my airway. And I'll wake up and with a hypoxic type of, gasping episode. So I know that inflammation and even food allergens can be a subtle, causative factor for that inflammation.
Right, exactly. Anything that creates inflammation, or contributes to and I'm throwing some terms out there, but what we call the allostatic load, your body's total
stress bucket.
Yeah, your stress bucket, exactly.
Bingo.
And so, we might see someone that we, label as a hothead or they can't tolerate stress, but they may have a ton of physiological imbalances and all their ATP and energy is being diverted to that.
Totally. I always tell patients, you have physical, chemical, and emotional stressors. Physical could be too much or too little exercise. It could be chronic pain from an injury. You also have the chemical stressors, whether it's food or infections or metals or mold or food allergens or low stomach acid or et cetera. And then you have obviously the emotional stress, relationships, finances, family, work. All of those stressors are like a little ball that go into that stress bucket. When that bucket starts to overflow, that's where your kind of allostatic load is tapped out, and that's where symptoms tend to occur. And then typically in our allostatic, or I would say allopathic medical world, symptoms equal drug prescriptions, and drug prescriptions have side effects which cause more symptoms. So you're in this vicious cycle where medicine actually tries to solve allostatic load problems or stress bucket problems by actually giving you more stress. So in functional medicine world, we're trying to actually take those stress balls out of the bucket, right?
Right, exactly. The more stressors that we can take off of our bucket, we want to try and eliminate as many stressors as humanly possible. And the ones that we can't completely eliminate, we want to certainly mitigate as much as possible.
Love it. And let's go back into the mitochondria, because basically the mitochondria is kind of the powerhouse of our cell. You have what's called the Kreb cycle, which is part of the mitochondria, where you're generating ATP. You're generating these reducing agents called FADH2 and NADH, and they're basically grabbing hydrogen molecules, these electrons, to then bring those over to the electron transport chain so we can generate more energy. Would you mind talking more about the mitochondria and just how it connects into the Kreb cycle, the electron transport chain, and even glycolysis too?
Yeah, so when we think about mitochondria, we always talk about, they're the batteries of the cells. They provide your energy source, your energy currency, the ATP. But what we've learned in the past 10 years is that they do so much more than that. I actually have a 400 and something page ebook on mitochondria that goes into details, and like I said, it's one of those dots that you can connect pretty much every illness out there to some degree to mitochondrial dysfunction. And producing energy, fats, carbs, proteins get broken down and go into the energy producing cycle, the Kreb cycle, and then you get oxidative phosphorylation and fatty acid burning in the mitochondria. But mitochondria, some of the other roles that they participate in, one is cell sensing and signaling. So, controlling how cells line up in the extracellular matrix, or that little area that surrounds our groups of cells. It's important for growth factor sensing, immune function, because a lot of times what happens, as you know, people may test the count or the amount of immune cells, but they don't test the activity of them. And a lot of our immune cells require a lot of ATP, and your immune function may not be working very well because you don't have enough energy to heal. Healing takes a ton of energy. And so, if we have a lot of other stressors, the ATP or the energy currency is going to be going down that pathway.
Interesting. Now, how does the electron transport chain and the Krebs cycle connect in with the mitochondria?
Yeah, so the mitochondria, you have an inner mitochondrial membrane and an outer mitochondrial membrane, and you have certain fatty acids in those membranes. And what happens is that we inherit our mitochondrial DNA from our mom, and you can have mutations of mitochondrial DNA, but more often you have what we call mitochondriopathies, which is just a fancy term for damage to the mitochondria.
Yes. And
so anything that damages the mitochondria, and the most common things are environmental pollutants, persistent organic pollutants, endocrine-disrupting chemicals, or you can have what Dr. Alex Vasquez calls a microbial mitochondriopathy. So you have an infection, maybe you go through a period of stress, a virus gets reactivated. Well, that inflammatory cascade that's produced, even if you don't know the name, you felt it before. It's called a cytokine storm.
Yeah.
And those there's pro-inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines. And when you have a lot of stealth pathogens or microbes and bugs built up in your body, there's a constant low-grade level of inflammation, and our mitochondria are extremely susceptible to free radical damage. And that's an important point, because the two antioxidants that we need to protect us or protect our mitochondria are glutathione, which we both love, and superoxide dismutase. So if you have, and I know you mentioned genetic or epigenetic testing. But if you have certain polymorphisms, which is like a minor version of a mutation, you may not make enough glutathione or superoxide dismutase, or you may not recycle them to the reduced state, which is how our body needs to use them. So that's incredibly important because, like I said, the mitochondria are very susceptible to oxidative damage, and if you don't have those two antioxidants there to protect it, it's really open to enemy fire.
Totally makes sense. And so I'm just kind of coming back here for the energy production part. So part of the ATP part is through the Krebs cycle as well as the electron transport chain, right?
Yeah, exactly. So electron transport chain is 5 complexes, and they basically play hot potato with an electron. And an important point for people to understand here is that this is really biophysically driven more than biochemically driven. And what I mean by that is that your body uses photons and protons and light to create energy and increase ATP in the mitochondria. And anytime we can tweak or alter the biophysical status of the cell or cellular machinery, then we can control multiple biochemical reactions.
Got it. And how about the Krebs cycle as well? Krebs cycle is the same thing. We're producing all these reducing agents to help basically bring those electrons into the electron transport chain so they can be kind of tossed back and forth, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, proteins, carbs, and fats get broken down into acetyl-CoA so that it can go into the Krebs cycle. And one other thing that is just an aside, we talk about L-carnitine and, the benefits that it has, acetyl-L-carnitine.
Yes.
Well, it transports fatty acids from the cell, the cytoplasm of the cell, into the mitochondria, where you can burn fats through a process of beta oxidation.
Yes.
So if you're deficient in L-carnitine, you'll certainly be fatigued because you won't be able to burn fatty acids.
I love it. And that's called the carnitine shuttle. And I appreciate your biochem background. You got a biochem degree from NC State, right?
NC State, definitely not. Wake Forest, the Wake Forest.
Wake Forest. Oh, the Wake Forest. Okay, got it. Very cool. Well, I appreciate biochem. Brings me back to my undergrad days. I love it. The carnitine shuttle is so important because basically your body is using carnitine, which is made from 2 amino acids, methionine and lysine, and it basically shuttles fat into the mitochondria so the fat can be burned up through that beta oxidation pathway. Now, in my biochem textbook that I have right on the shelf behind me here, it was really interesting because it even said in the biochem textbook that these amino acids, methionine and lysine, could be deficient in a vegetarian-based diet. So I'm like, this is quite interesting because these sulfur amino acids are harder to get in these vegetarian diets. So really important. I see a lot of my sicker patients, especially patients with mitochondrial issues, aren't getting the right fats, aren't getting the right enough of these high-quality sulfur amino acids, especially the ones that make glutathione, glycine, glutamine, cysteine. And you mentioned earlier that you have to build that membrane too, which we know that the high-quality, good saturated fats are going to be building blocks. So I went on a tear there, but fats, amino acids, and the amino acids for glutathione, which all play into this whole mitochondrial thing, right?
Right, exactly. So, we can burn fat and protein. It's, the carb advocates say, we have to have, glucose or sugar. But, if you look at the biochemistry, that's not true. But yeah, different environmental toxicants and nutrient deficiencies can basically block the conversion of one metabolite of the Krebs cycle to another. So,
Yes.
You have acetyl-CoA, pyruvates, all those type of molecules, malic acid or malate, and the different compounds, metabolites like oxaloacetate, et cetera, the enzymes that convert them may be impacted negatively by environmental toxicity.
Yes. Totally. And that we need all these various nutrients to pump that Krebs cycle up. I mean, some of the nutrients that I put in my mitochondrial support called mitosynergy is obviously the B vitamins are really important. L-carnitine, as we already mentioned, is really important. I also like creatine. I like alpha lipoic acid. I like a lot of the Krebs cycle intermediary nutrients like malic acid, succinic acid, D-ribose.
Yeah, malic acid is good for aluminum detox as well.
Oh, very cool. Also, I do a little resveratrol, CoQ10, which we know is really good for the electron transport chain, and then alpha lipoic acid, even some curcumin as well.
Oh, yeah. Curcumin is one of my probably my first go-to supplement for mitochondrial health. And it's more of an indirect effect where it turns down the volume on NF-kappa beta, which is just a molecule coding or trying to read our pro-inflammatory genes.
Interesting. So if you were trying to get someone's diet dialed in, what would that diet look like to that average patient?
I'm going to tell people to avoid gluten and dairy in general.
Yep.
Some people, they get stressed out over what they're going to eat, and so I don't focus too much on the gluten cross-reactive foods. But I try to restore or calm down inflammation in the gut lining first and repair the tight gap junctions and the microvilli. And I use the product, and again, I'm not connected to this product, but Restore, restoreforhealth.com, and it works really well in terms of healing the gut lining, but also helping to increase your overall microbiome diversity. And, we don't typically think about the gut and mitochondria together, but particular compounds that are released from bacteria in the gut. One is very inflammatory, and it's called lipopolysaccharide.
Yep.
And it increases systemic inflammation greatly, and it turns on those inflammatory genes. So curcumin goes in and says, nope, let's turn that knob back down. And that's why I like curcumin, because it works on so many different levels as well as having antimicrobial properties.
What are the big bacterial infections that you're seeing in your clinic that are driving up the LPS? One of the things I'm seeing under specific stool tests, we're seeing a lot of H. pylori. I'm seeing a lot of Citrobacter, a lot of Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a lot of Klebsiella. Those are the big things that I'm seeing. What are you seeing, Doc?
Those are the exact same ones that I'm really seeing on.
Yeah.
I'd also add in Blastocystis hominis.
Oh, yeah, parasites for sure. Yep.
Yeah, and I do the PCR testing, which I've had good results with.
Which
a
one?
lot of
GI map?
It's the DRG labs.
Yeah, I use both. I run them both side by side.
Yeah, and I wasn't happy when Genova merged with Metametrics.
Terrible.
And they changed one of their pages, and
Terrible.
The price is pretty high. But I like the DRG labs. I think it's more economical.
The problem with DRG
those are the common
any
infections that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Along with, of course, Candida. But one important point to kind of make about gut health is that one thing I see people forgetting is they don't reboot their secretory IgA.
Totally.
And that's the mucosal immune system in the gut lining, the lining of the lungs, the nasal passages, etc. And if you just go in and kill off these pathogens or bad bacteria, they're going to come back if you don't create an environment that is not conducive to their living.
Love it. And are you doing increased Saccharomyces boulardii to help bring up the IgA post-infection removal?
I don't anymore. Occasionally I do. Actually, a chiropractor colleague showed me a study that looked at those with leaky gut and, some type or some level of neuroimmune syndrome. And he showed that, with leaky gut, if you don't heal the wall first, taking something like S. boulardii may actually provoke an autoimmune type reaction. Now, the study wasn't very big, but, I think the principle that people forget is that, if you cut your forearm, you're going to want to wipe it off and put, a Band-Aid on it to prevent pathogen entry. Same type of thing in the gut. If you have a leaky gut and you just start supplementing with probiotics, yes, some probiotics can help heal the gut lining, but it can leak through and create a huge inflammatory reaction.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a sequence in how you treat infections. In my clinic, we always remove the foods first, like you mentioned. We replace enzymes and acids that are going to help digestion. We repair the hormonal system, whether it's thyroid imbalances, adrenal or female or male hormone imbalances. We support the gut lining nutrients. Then we remove the infections. Then we repopulate probiotics. Then we retest. And I find that order tends to work the best. But I agree that you really have to do all the other things ahead of time so you have the best bang for your bucks when it is time to put the probiotics back in the system.
Yeah, I just ran into a lot of people that had been taking probiotics for years, even good quality probiotics.
Yeah.
And most people think that they just kind of go down there and set up shop, but they don't realize it's more of a transitory interaction with the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And that's why you need to constantly, have intake of bacteria, because our ancestors, that's what they were exposed to, based on the soil.
Totally. That's why you do a lot of fermented foods. I recommend once my patients are really good and cleaned up, I typically throw a bottle of probiotics at them once a quarter, as long as they're getting in good probiotics daily, whether it's with kimchi or sauerkraut or Bubby's fermented pickles or a low sugar kombucha, not the high sugar alternatives that I might as well call them soda.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you.
Now, on the DRG, though, they're not testing the individual bacteria molecules, though. I mean, I'm seeing them. They're looking at H. pylori, and they'll look at, like, some of the transient food allergen or food poisoning bacteria like Campylobacter or Shigella. But how are you looking at the other ones that I mentioned, the Klebsiella, the Citrobacter, etc.?
I'll have to go back and look, but I thought that DRG tested for Citrobacteria. I could be wrong on that one. But I do, to answer your question, I go about addressing the gut similar to what you do, but I provide some broad spectrum antimicrobial support. One of my favorites, which I know you've heard of, is biocidin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, again, a lot of these pathogens, like you mentioned, require very specific supplementation. But, some you can eradicate with, broad spectrum biofilm busting and then antimicrobials.
Totally. What's your favorite biofilm buster?
I use Interphase Plus
Claire Labs.
from Claire Labs.
Mm-hmm.
And have pretty good results with that. Occasionally I'll have someone, like I have this guy who's a yoga teacher and health coach, and he's been doing detox and this type of stuff for years. And he took just the Interphase Plus by itself and had a very negative reaction because he has, such a high metal load underneath that biofilm. Yeah,
the Interphase Plus, I think, has an EDTA chelating compound in it. So
right.
Some of the biofilms will use lead and some heavy metals as a kind of a composition for that shield they hold up, right?
Right, exactly. So they're using calcium and magnesium, and that's a great way for them to hide from the immune cells. On top of the bacteria doing the quorum sensing and exchanging DNA, people don't realize exactly how smart they really are in terms of kind of manipulating our immune system.
And just to piggyback a little bit, you made a couple of really good points earlier. You talked about oxygen. I think oxygen is really important because we have various anemias, whether it's an iron-based anemia or a B vitamin-based anemia. Both are really important for maturing healthy red blood cells and helping red blood cells to carry oxygen. Because if we can't carry oxygen and we can't carry nutrition, our mitochondria, for the most part, screwed. So how are you addressing in your patients optimal iron and or B12 levels? What are you looking at to assess that?
Well, I think it's one of those things like if we just started with a client right now and we tested for food sensitivities, they'd, light up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah, of course.
And so I tend to work on the gut to improve, iron absorption, increase vitamin C levels, to look at those things and then look at, the binding proteins as well. One thing that I learned from Dietrich Klinghardt, he talks about, and different pathogens have a different effect on it, but at different stages of an infection, it may drive up ferritin, and at some point it may drive down ferritin. So, I thought that was kind of interesting. So I do see a correlation with a lot of pathogens, that, correlates with these issues as well.
Interesting. Yeah, my clinic, typically the big three things that I see that are driving iron issues are going to be vegetarian diets. Number two, female hormone issues that are driving excessive menstruation or hemorrhagia, or number 3 is just gut malabsorptions. They have low stomach acid, they can't ionize minerals, or they have leaky gut and malabsorption, and they just can't break down some of the heme compounds in the foods. So those are the big 3 that I see, and we try to work on all of those. What are you seeing regarding the female hormone issues and low iron?
A lot of times I see, low thyroid function.
Yeah.
With low iron, and obviously, I think I learned this expression from Apex, but they talk about if you don't fix iron and you don't fix insulin, nothing else will work.
It's a deal buster.
And so, I try to look at, the transport proteins, as well as, like you said, overall absorption and gut health, and making sure that people don't realize how energy intense breaking down protein is. And so a lot of times, it's good or beneficial to give a client, I've found, at least the essential amino acids on an empty stomach. And they're like, well, why can't I just eat a steak? They don't realize that, we're giving them, hand-delivering the bioavailable version of what so many biochemical reactions in their body need.
I agree. The thermic effect of food on high protein compounds like steak is 30 to 50%, meaning 50% of the calories or the energy in that food just gets used up in breaking it down. So when you give free-form amino acids, you're basically giving 100% of it versus half of it getting used to pay the bill to break it down, so to speak.
Right. Exactly.
And how are you? Go ahead. Yep.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
And how are you looking at, how do you diagnose B vitamin like B12 issues or low iron issues? What tests are you running to assess that?
I run all like the urinary iron binding capacity, ferritin, total iron binding capacity, B vitamin issues. If someone can do, at least LabCorp was doing, I think they still are, an RBC B12 and an RBC folate.
Oh.
If not, the lab in Germany, they used to have a branch in New Jersey, but they closed, Health Diagnostics Research Institute. They do a whole real-time methylation panel that shows what your methylation pathways are doing with the nutrients you have at that specific time slot versus the 23andMe, which is just a genetic or epigenetic blueprint.
Got it.
And so, in terms of iron, I look at gut health and things of that nature. And I'm sorry, what was the last part of your question?
B12. Any other B12 markers?
Yeah, so I'll look at, the MMA and things like that. But from the studies I've read, for example, like many other markers, B12 levels in most Asian countries are much, much higher than here. And there have been no documented cases of adverse reactions to B12. The only thing I've seen in clients is, if they have a polymorphism called COMT, sometimes too many methyl donors. A methyl group is just a carbon with 3 hydrogens.
Yep.
And so all those methylation reactions, if you give them too many methyl donors, they can get overstimulated.
Love it, man. Very good information. So just kind of recapping here, just for all the listeners at home, I know we're going really kind of down the rabbit hole. So we're talking about the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. We need healthy fats in our diet. We need to keep the food allergens out. We need to make sure we're infection-free so the LPS isn't poisoning our mitochondria. We need healthy nutrients, B vitamins. Curcumin helps with the nuclear factor kappa beta. Good hormones, good absorption, good iron levels, good B12. Is there anything you want to add to that summary for optimal mitochondrial function for our listeners, Tim?
Just glutathione again, because it's most of its press based on its ability to detoxify, but people don't realize that it's a natural antiviral, that you have to have it for gut healing to occur. It's extremely important in immune function. It's extremely important in terms of mitochondrial protection. And that, again, with the other antioxidant superoxide dismutase that I've mentioned. Now, without getting into too much biochemistry, instead of just kind of chasing those individual markers, we can take different nutrients or nutraceuticals that increase NRF2, which activates all of your antioxidant enzymes and turns off a lot of the pro-oxidant signaling that's going on. And so things that would activate that are things like sulforaphane, possibly turmeric and resveratrol, but thinking more of what can I do to affect all these different symptoms and systems is kind of the approach that I take.
Very cool. When you're trying to improve glutathione levels, do you try to just give some of the amino acids so the patient can make the glutathione, or do you give the actual liposomal glutathione? How do you differentiate the two?
I use a lot of times the neurobiologics transdermal glutathione. Sometimes I will use the Apex Energetics superoxycell, which has glutathione and superoxide dismutase. But overall, sometimes I will give people N-acetylcysteine. But for some reason, and you may be able to shed some light on this for me, I've searched for an answer for years, but some people, including myself, will respond negatively and have a huge metal stir up when they take N-acetylcysteine, but if I take glutathione, I'm fine, which doesn't make sense since NAC is a precursor to glutathione. And I've had this in just a small subset of people, like I said, including myself, back many years ago when I took N-acetylcysteine. I had a major yeast flare and, had a metallic taste in my mouth, all sorts of negative things.
The only thing I could think of clinically is that NAC is a pretty strong biofilm buster. Is there could be some kind of biofilm release with the high amount of NAC? I'd be curious to see if it happens with cysteine or glycine versus just NAC by itself.
Doesn't happen with glycine.
Interesting. So it could be a biofilm issue. I wouldn't be surprised.
Excellent. Well, thank you for shedding some light on that.
Yeah, no problem. And you mentioned the nerve stuff, the nerve 2 inhibitors there, or I think it's the nerve 2. Is it an activator? Inducers. The nerve 2 inducers that you mentioned. Green tea is also a big one. Milk thistle, pomegranate, even green coffee, ginkgo, olive leaf, and then you mentioned the sulforaphane, which will be primarily found in your cruciferous vegetables.
Right, exactly. And, when you can, we were talking about these fancy acronyms, NF-kappa beta, NRF2, but the take-home message for people is that instead of chasing, just one marker and taking one supplement for that, if we can try and control what genes are being read, we can have a lot more impact on someone's health.
Very cool. So let's segue to the gene portion here. I mean, I talked to Ben Lynch last year at one of the conferences I went to, and he was talking about that everyone's looking too much at the genes because so much of the genes are the junk DNA, and there's only a couple of genes that really matter. Obviously, his big focus is on the MTHFR gene, which is the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase gene, SNP. What genes do you think are the most important? Because when we look at these gene pages, whether it's like Genetic Genie or LiveWello, you get like 50 pages. It's super overwhelming, and then one page says this and the other page contradicts the other. So how the heck do you make sense of it all?
Well, first of all, I try to go back to my biochemistry background. When all my friends and everything were ready to get out and finish cell and molecular biology, I was really getting into it because I'm like, if you understand how the cell works, then you can really understand the body.
Totally.
And so that's how I kind of approach things, is looking at the biochemistry. But in order to do that, you have to test for active biomarkers. So biomarker, it can be anything. It can be like a physical measurement like blood pressure, or it can be your iron level or your testosterone level, or any marker tested through a urine sample or a stool sample. And so, that's kind of how I approach things, I'll take into account the polymorphisms, but I don't sit there and add them up and say, okay, this, but that. You'll drive yourself crazy. I mean, ultimately, we have hundreds of thousands of polymorphisms. What are we going to do when the report reaches 200 pages or 300 pages? I mean, it's a situation where they can't see the forest for the trees, and I'm probably one of the people to blame for that, because around 2010, 2011, I started really talking about MTHFR after learning about it from Kendall Stewart, who's in Austin, Texas. But I looked at GSTM, which is glutathione S transferase.
Yep.
GSTP, SOD, which stands for superoxide dismutase.
Yep.
Again, when someone has a polymorphism, just so your listeners are clear, it may mean that the enzyme that those genes or that gene is coding for speed up, or they may slow down. And it just depends on the specific polymorphism. And, you have to look. So like one polymorphism is called CBS. This is thion beta synthase or synthetase. And one of them speeds up the enzyme, whereas another one slows it down. So you may have some canceling out of effects. But ultimately what you're doing is looking at a blueprint, and I call them biochemical hiccups or potential biochemical hiccups in your physiology, and it's meant to empower people because then you can bypass, these genetic hiccups. So to list some of the others that I looked at, one is the APOE, which plays a role in brain health, as well as your ability to tolerate a Paleolithic type diet. It also plays a significant role in your ability to detoxify. And so, it really, I take it case by case, but I tell people, get the 23andMe done. It's $99, a one-time deal. You never have to redo it. But in order to figure out what's going on, like real time, we need to do an oats test or a methylation panel from that specialty lab. And, what people don't understand is that you may not have any copies of MTHFR, but you can have what I call a functional polymorphism, where those pathways are not working because of too much oxidative stress or environmental chemicals or nutrient deficiencies.
Malabsorption, gut issues?
Exactly. So a lot of times people will say, okay, why aren't we working on methylation? I'm like, we're working on gut health first, which is going to help unload the liver. And, if you have too many lipopolysaccharides and other endotoxins, it can back up phase 1 detox. So, the first step is really working on the things that have to work no matter what your goal is. And so whether someone wants to be a pro athlete or have more energy to play with their kids or grandkids, their gut has to function well, just like their adrenals and thyroid.
Very cool. So let's do a quick rapid fire and just go to the top 10 SNPs. What's number 1?
Okay. I would probably say MTHFR.
Got it. And
and again, there's multiple versions of it. But it basically, to give people a summary, it affects glutathione production, the production of DNA and RNA, production of myelin that coats our nerves, the production of neurotransmitters and growth factors. And then after that, I would list probably APOE. Then I would probably list the glutathione-related polymorphisms.
Got it.
And the superoxide dismutase polymorphism. Then I would probably look at the VDR, which is the vitamin D receptor. And I would include in there, too, the BCMO polymorphisms, which prevent the conversion of beta-carotene into retinoic acid.
Vitamin A, right.
Yeah, and so then you have to use, a more bioavailable form of vitamin A. And people, they're so focused on vitamin D, they don't know that vitamin A is really important for thyroid health and immune function and gut health. So, those are the ones that I really focus on. If research comes out tomorrow that says, another one that I forgot is PON1, PON1. That greatly affects your ability to detoxify certain environmental chemicals. So someone has to be a lot stricter with their dirty dozen, clean 15 eating.
Totally.
Especially if they have a glutathione polymorphism on top of it, because, they have such a reduced capability of detoxifying.
All right, so we have our MTHFR, we have the ApoE1 and 2, we have the PON1, we have the COMT, we have the glutathione, we have the VDR, the vitamin D receptor. Does that sound about right?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
And I just want to make sure the listeners really understand, because the big one that's out there is the MTHFR. And I'll just break it down here for a second. We have the C67787. We have heterozygous or homozygous. Heterozygous is you have
7T and A129AC. Yep.
Yeah, A219AC, correct. And the big one is, I think the C is the bigger one. If we're homozygous in that's an 80% reduction. If we're hetero, where it's only a 40% reduction. And
well, they kind of affect different things, and again, you know, like if you get the report from MTHFR support, they have so many different forms of MTHFR. But the two, like you said, that have been most researched are A1298C, and that, you know, you hear about the C677T because it can lead to cardiovascular events, strokes, heart attacks, and it's associated with elevated homocysteine. But you know, you want to really look at all the other factors that are involved as well. And so with, you know, different polymorphisms, like I said before, you know, it may just be something that you avoid. Like in the case of PON1, we know we need to avoid those certain foods. NAT2 is another one that's involved in the liver phase 2 detox process called acetylation.
Yep.
And again, this is another example. Some of the NAT2 SNPs will speed up that enzyme, meaning it labels things harmful that aren't really harmful, and other forms will slow things down, or so that you miss potentially harmful compounds. So again, you have to kind of look. I look at groups of polymorphisms overall. And again, if someone comes to me and they have mold toxicity and they're sleeping in a room with black mold, listen, MTHFR is not going to be the first thing we work on.
Environmental, totally.
Yeah, and so that's how kind of I approach them, along with healing the gut and really controlling oxidative stress, because if oxidative stress and inflammation are present, none of these goals can be achieved.
Totally understand. So with the MTHFR, we have the C and the homozygous, heterozygous for the C677-8T or whatever, and then the A2198C. How much percent is reduced depending on whether it's hetero or homozygous for each?
It is different for different versions of MTHFR.
How about for the C and A versions?
What's that?
For the C and A versions.
Yeah, so the C677T and then the A1298C are the two you're talking about, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so the A1298C doesn't get much attention. It's more associated with neuroimmune type issues, meaning autoimmune disorders, lupus, Sjogren's, rheumatoid arthritis, those sorts of things. It's also associated to some degree in the research with autism, but research shows for both the C677T form and the A1298C form, you know, they are responsible for different things. And again, you know, I don't even know, there's dozens of different versions of MTHFR SNPs. Those are just the ones with the most research behind them now. And so in order, you ask me, you know, how much is that enzyme function reduced? I forget the statistics, you know, it varies by ethnicity. But again, we have to factor in oxidative stress, heavy metals, nutrient depletions.
Totally.
People don't take those into account. And I won't name any names, but there's a lady that, you know, wants you to do like $2,000 a month of testing, and you need, if you have this polymorphism, you take these 4 supplements, and if you have this polymorphism, take these 2, and people end up on like $600 a month of supplements, and you don't even know if they're expressing. And so a lot of these so-called, you know, polymorphisms will be silenced by doing the things we've discussed, such as controlling inflammation, improving gut health, improving blood sugar, optimizing iron and oxygen delivery. All of those things are positive signals sent to our nucleus of our cells.
So let's say we have a homozygous of the C677T. So we have that 70 to 80% reduction in that enzyme. So let's say we're doing all the downstream things, right? We're doing the glutathione, the diet, the oxygen support, the B vitamins. What other supplements would we add in on the methylating nutrient side? Will we just be focusing on LMTHF folate? Will we do methyl B12 or hydroxyl or adenylyl B12? What would you recommend on the supplement side specific for those SNPs?
Well, first would be, and I know I sound like a broken record, supplements to go after inflammation. So curcumin, maybe CBD oil, but one of the two probably most important nutrients that are crucial for all these methylation reactions, there's hundreds of them, are magnesium and zinc. Let's not get away from the basics too far here.
Of course.
They're cofactors, that's what they are, for different enzymatic reactions in the body. And so, I work on repleting someone's RBC magnesium and RBC zinc. I make sure that we have the other B vitamins like B1, B2, B3, 5. And then as far as B12, usually most people will do pretty well on a combination of adenylyl and methyl. Mm-hmm. Like I said, some people who are really sensitive to methyl donors will get overstimulated if you give too much methylfolate and B12. But one important point I want to make here, I'm not trying to scare people, but I get a lot of people coming to me with these reports, and they just want to take methylfolate and B12 and be done with it. But if you take those two nutrients in the presence of oxidative stress, you create something called peroxynitrite, and that is a very harmful compound to all of our cellular structures. And so order here is important. There's a method to the madness. And so, again, the other B vitamin cofactors, B5, B6, biotin, you add in B12, and methylfolate is last. And then for the transport of B12 to get into your cells, you need lithium orotate. Lithium is an important trace mineral, and it has really good properties in terms of neuroprotection or brain protection.
Interesting. So when we add all these nutrients in, we talked about the magnesium, the zinc, the B vitamins. When would you in particularly use methyl B12 versus adenylyl B12 versus hydroxyl B12? How would you apply that specifically with each patient?
So with adenylyl, it works more on the mitochondria.
Yeah.
So if you really have someone with a lot of mitochondrial issues, I'll use a lot of adenylyl.
Got it.
Methyl, what I do is I usually start them out with adenylyl, and then later on, when they're processing the B vitamins well, I'll add in, the methylcobalamin. As far as the hydroxy B12, you can check someone's, it's the P-ADMA for nitric oxide status. Hydroxy B12 works on improving nitric oxide levels, which is an important cell signaling molecule in immune function and vascular function.
Interesting. Excellent. So anything else you want to comment on regarding methylation, or do you feel like you've done a good job hitting all the key points?
It affects so many different systems in the body. And I want to make an important point here. If you don't remember anything else, remember that if you have MTHFR, the more copies you have, the less ability you have to metabolize folic acid. So the whole point here is that folic acid will build up in your bloodstream, and studies show that it will lower your natural killer cells, which is not good for fighting pathogens or for cancer risk. And so I see a lot of OBGYNs putting people on folic acid even when they know they have MTHFR.
Yep. And
it just goes back to a fundamental misunderstanding or lack of understanding of basic biochemistry, because that's the whole point of MTHFR, is that you cannot process folic acid that's added to things like grains and cereals.
Exactly. That's the key thing, is you got to make sure you're at least on an LMTHF folate or a calcium folate. But again, if a supplement companies chose to put folic acid in there, they've really made a statement that they're undervaluing the raw material that they're putting in their supplements. So that's super important. And like you said, the refined, fortified junk food is what's going to have the folic acid in it. It's going to be the orange juice, the bread, the grains, that kind of stuff.
Right. And real quick, there is a condition called cerebral folate deficiency, whereby you cannot get folate into the central nervous system and the cerebral spinal fluid. I know there's, I think, one, maybe two labs that test for it. When I learned about it, it was actually a research project by Dr. Quadros at the State University of New York. And different, experts or authority figures in the area will say, different things about it. But with cerebral folate deficiency, most of the time, the way someone supplements is using leucovorin, which is prescription folinic acid.
Yep.
So we had about folic acid. Well, one step more active than that is folinic acid.
Yep.
And I asked Dr. Quadros, well, why did you guys use this in the studies if they had MTHFR? Why not use L5 MTHF directly? And he said, one, it was just the way the study was written, and two, there are some potential neurotransmitter, neurological functions that could be improved with leucovorin versus L5 MTHF. But you basically have to hypersaturate the receptors so that you can get transport across the brain, and this affects the central nervous system greatly.
Very cool. Excellent knowledge bombs there, Dr. Tim. I want to pivot here briefly, man. I wanted to talk about mycotoxins. And mycotoxins are going to be the toxins produced by mold. And we've talked about this on our previous podcast that we did. So please refer back to the first podcast. But mycotoxins are really important. Obviously, the first line of defense, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. You correct me if I'm wrong, but get out of the environment where the mold is. That's probably number one. And then number two is going to involve other steps. And I wanted to kind of get your breakdown of what people should do outside of the first step, environmental removal, next to kind of eliminate and reduce mycotoxin exposure.
Yeah, well, number one, you got to get rid of the moisture source.
Yes.
So depending on where you live, like I live in South Carolina, I have to have 2 dehumidifiers underneath the house, and then I have one running upstairs even during the winter. And, there's going to be mold everywhere. But what happens is, and a lot of people think mold is only in older homes, but with new homes, they try to build them to be so energy efficient that it only leaves a few species of mold in the house. And, it's called niche exclusion, just like in the gut. If you only have a couple species of good bacteria, you can have an overgrowth of those good bacteria and an undergrowth or deficiency of the others. And with mycotoxins, we can do a few different types of environmental tests. The ones at your hardware store are not accurate, but typically they will come back. There's one test called an ERMI, capital RMI, and there's it's not really new anymore, but it's called a HERTZ-Me2 test. And the third one I'll mention is the Real-Time Labs. They offer an environmental test. And so you want to test your environment, and you'll be surprised because, it takes darkness and a moisture source, and most people don't get their ductwork cleaned enough. And these mycotoxins, they're very low molecular weight proteins, so most air filters will not get them. But you can have someone who's certified in testing come in, which I did, and they type up a pretty long report, and they list the species that you have. And what's important here is that there are certain genetic glitches, and this is not on the 23andMe, but there's one called the human leukocyte antigen, and there are many of those, but one has to do with your ability to detoxify mycotoxins. I happen to have the worst one called the dreaded genotype, and that means that my immune system does not tag mycotoxins when I ingest them, whether it's through food or breathing. And so they build up in my body, and you want to talk about something that will disrupt every other system in the body. You can have, as a male, you can have a testosterone level of 1,000 and a great free testosterone level, but if you still have mycotoxins, you're going to feel horrible. Your 5 different types of your immune cells are going to be turned off, and that's just from one mycotoxin. It's called a gliotoxin. And, it causes system-wide chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And even after the removal of the stressor, your immune system may still be, reacting strongly. And so you can kill the mold, but a lot of people will use things like ozone, and ozone does kill mold, but it releases dead mycotoxins, which are immunogenic or stimulating to the immune system. So the most reliable method that I've come across is using biodegradable enzymes. And it was expensive. It was about $10,000, but I've heard of people spending up to $70,000 for mold remediation. So you want to really work with someone who's reputable and, you know, who's not out to just try and make money and say, oh, we need to tear everything down in your house. So I bring up the genetic glitch. That can be tested through LabCorp, and there's 5 different levels of that genotype, and 25% of the population has one. So what I'm getting at here is that you can have an allergy or sensitivity to a mold, but the issue that I'm really focusing on here is the inability to detoxify mycotoxins. And that's where Dave Asprey comes in. He has the dreaded genotype as well. That's why he makes bulletproof coffee. Coffee, nuts, grains, things like that are going to be sources of mycotoxins. And people say, oh, well, big deal. But they're not part of that 25% of the population that has a genetic glitch. And so these things may be very small, very low molecular weight, but they can disrupt everything from hormones to brain function to immune function. Gut health is another one. If you have a client or patient whose gut won't heal, I won't get into why, but it has to do with a hormone called alpha MSH. But these mycotoxins, so we talked about testing the environment. Testing your body level, there's a urine mycotoxin test from real-time labs, but there's a kicker to it. You want to do a glutathione push, you know, where you're hooked up to the IV and they just push some glutathione, or take a large oral bolus of glutathione about 30 to 45 minutes before collecting your urine for this test. Because if I were to take that test and I didn't do that, it would come up with low levels because I'm a poor excreter. It's sort of the same thing as with metals. So when I take glutathione and then check my mycotoxin levels, it'll tell me, you know, where I am. And the follow-up testing is much cheaper than the original test, which is pretty expensive. But we want to check your body burden to see how aggressive we need to be in terms of getting these mycotoxins out. So how do we get them out? We bind them up in the bile, and or we use a protocol called a lipid exchange protocol. And it can be a combination of oral and IV fatty acids, and all you're doing is you're rehabbing the cell membranes. And when you do that, that allows toxins to move out and nutrients to move in. And it's a high-fat diet, moderate protein diet, low-carbohydrate diet, because you're trying to reduce oxidative stress on the cell membranes. And a combination of that, it's called the Patricia Kane protocol or lipid exchange protocol, along with using binders, works really well. You may also have an infection of those mycotoxins, so they may have created a systemic infection. Then you would, have to take either herbal, some sort of nutraceutical or prescription antifungals to get rid of that.
So looking at all the different options we have, right, we're decreasing the moisture, dehumidifiers, we're maybe using a mold remediation service that uses some enzyme therapies to help clean things out. There's some decent air filters out there that are better, that will at least help partially. You mentioned the glutathione, right? Especially it's like a challenge when you test it with real time, but you could probably use liposomal glutathione as well. What about, and you mentioned the bile, right? So eating fat's going to be helpful because that will stimulate the bile to release your, stimulate your gallbladder to release bile, which is like changing the gunky oil every day. What about modified citrus pectin? What about zeolite? What about activated charcoal? Any thoughts on those things?
From my friends who are certified in the Shoemaker protocol, Shoemaker uses a cholesterol medication called cholestyramine. Yep. The issue with that is that if you get it compounded, it's very expensive. But two, it's going to bind up all of your good nutrients, and it usually constipates you. And most people with biotoxin issues are already constipated. Yep. But he uses that medication and also has aspartame in it. For $200 something for a month's supply, you can get it compounded. There's another prescription called Welchol, and again, these are both cholesterol medications. And it's interesting because they hand them out like candy for high cholesterol, but when my clients need them for, binding mold, they look at you like, oh no, we would never do that.
I know,
but to answer the question about modified citrus pectin and activated charcoal.
Or bentonite clay.
What bentonite clay? Yeah, the one that the Klinghardt community, the Mycotoxin community has kind of found to be most efficient as from a nutraceutical perspective is Takasimi Supreme.
Yep.
Which is, from a bamboo tree.
Bamboo shoots, yep.
Yeah, and so it's pretty much like activated charcoal. But there's also another process, and I'll try to find the link whereby, while you're trying to detoxify the mycotoxins, you neutralize them so they're less reactive in the body. And someone figured out that a specific type of Hawaiian nani juice does that. I have no connection to that company, but, I've heard great things about it.
How about just using the herbs? I know I know you're referring to Dr. Michael Leibowitz. He has the Takasimi Supreme. He also has the Noni Supreme. Do you refer to the Noni as well to have those same effects?
I have not used the Noni a lot, to be quite honest with you. And so, again, my go-to is, either Takasimi Supreme or modified citrus pectin or apple pectin. Pectisol. But you can also use, like you said, bentonite clay. I just don't have a ton of experience using it. And I just kind of, a lot of times it's hard to research in all these different areas. So you have to kind of stick to some of your routine.
How about zeolite?
So that's pretty much what I do.
How about zeolite, Doc?
Oh, zeolite. Sorry about that. Well, a lot of different companies that sell zeolite, it's contaminated with aluminum. And I experienced that myself. I won't name the company, but my aluminum levels went up when I took it. There is a product, and I'm not going to mention it because I haven't fully, I don't feel fully comfortable mentioning it, but it is a certain type of zeolite that a very public figure recommends to get into the cell, but it's also sold by another company under another name, and it supposedly has testing to show that it is not contaminated with aluminum. And it's supposed to be small enough, the biophysical structure of it is supposed to be small enough that it can cross over into the cell.
Very cool. Awesome, Doc. You dropped some serious knowledge bombs here. We'll have to save everything else for a part 2. I love it. But last question here for you. If you're stuck on a desert island, what's the one supplement you bring with yourself?
Curcumin. Hands down.
Love it. Hands down. Kind of help modulate that nuclear factor kappa beta, right?
That's right. There you go. You got it.
Love it, Dr. Tim. Well, anyone listening here, Dr. Tim's available worldwide for Skype and phone consults. His Facebook is healyourbody.org. He's got a great blog post there. He's also been on lots of other podcasts like myself, Bulletproof Radio, etc., etc. So he's a knowledge wealth. Dr. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate the knowledge bombs. Anything else you want to leave our listeners with here today?
No, I would say that the general concept is that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not having a tremendous impact and effect on your health. And that applies to two things I deal with daily. One, EMFs, electromagnetic pollution, and the other one is mycotoxins. So two things that we can't really see but are having a tremendous impact on us. And I know we don't have time to get into this, but EMFs have been shown to activate something called the cell danger response. And it basically hijacks all the workings and metabolism of the cell. And so an interesting factoid that Dietrich Klinghardt points out is that people that are in high EMF environments or non-native EMF environments who have mold, they get sicker because those vibrations and frequencies send signals to the mold to produce more mycotoxins and more potent mycotoxins.
Make it stronger. Yep.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. We got to be inflammation detectives.
Yes,
Awesome.
Absolutely. You got to understand if you can understand what's happening at the cell and how to fix the cell, you'll fix everything else, because you got to remember all your different organ systems are made of cells.
Well, it's really great to have your biochem background here in the show, Dr. Tim. Thank you so much, and you have an awesome day. We'll talk real soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com.